Hello everyone, Storm here, and today we'll be doing another Total Drama What If. In the first episode of All Stars, we get a little joke from Chris that the crazy feral Ezekiel would be joining the cast to compete, but obviously this wasn't meant to be. Until I made What If World Tour had two teams. This led to Ezekiel being way more humanized and making it to the final four of World Tour. This would pretty solidly classify him as an all-star, and he's not fully feral either, so he could definitely be in this season. I think it's probably his best chance at least. Before we covered that, we had to talk about Revenge of the Island without Ezekiel in it, which actually led to some major changes. So this video is really a part 4 to that series, and I heavily recommend you check those videos out before this one. But once you get caught up, we can begin with what if Ezekiel was in Total Drama All-Stars. For starters, some of you who saw the Revenge video might be wondering if Brick will be in this All-Stars season, since he was a hypothetical winner. But remember that Owen and Beth didn't compete in All-Stars, although they both won a season, and Owen did make a cameo. So Brick doesn't have to compete just for winning, although it would be interesting. But in order to keep things as close to what if Ezekiel was in All-Stars as possible, I'm not going to include him. Instead, we'll still have Cameron, even though he didn't make it to the merge, but Sam got voted out before he did, and he's still in All-Stars for some reason, so we can just go with it here. Maybe one day I'll make a video putting Brick into this season if you guys want to see it. We're also not going to be replacing anyone with Ezekiel, we're just going to add him to the cast, which means we'll need an extra elimination at some point. But keep in mind that Chris's joke had Ezekiel tacked on, so that's why I'm pretty much just tacking him onto the cast. A final note before we start, remember that this is a what if, not a complete rewrite, so I'm going to be sticking as closely to what I think would realistically play out, not just what I want to happen. Starting off with episode 1, despite Ezekiel's rough appearance, his actions and friendship with Lindsay definitely make him more of a hero than a villain, so he's going to be on the heroic hamsters. But this means that the heroes now have 8 members to the villain 6, so Chris gives the villains the robot. It's still 8v7, but after the first challenge it won't matter much. Oh yeah, Ezekiel can now talk again since he's been working on getting his human capabilities back over the time between seasons. Courtney volunteers Lindsay for driving the cart, but Ezekiel offers to do it instead. Courtney doesn't like Ezekiel at all, but he's also kind of a beast, so she doesn't argue with him. Ezekiel is able to keep the heroes from falling behind since he'd be more used to running far than Lindsay, and would probably let Courtney out of the carriage instead of letting someone jump on top of her. Probably. Lindsay struggles finding a key in the water, which leads to them losing once Alejandro breaks out of the robot suit with the correct key. And so the heroes still lose, but Ezekiel being there prevents Lindsay from voting herself off since they're friends. Sadly, Lindsay failing at finding a key is what put them so far behind, so I don't see her making it past the first episode. Courtney is annoying, but she isn't super cruel in the first episode, so I don't see them voting her off. So rest in peace, Lindsay. In episode 2, the heroes originally won, and now they have an additional person, so they win even quicker. Lightning gets voted off by the villains, and Sam goes to Boney Island. Ezekiel doesn't bring Sam breakfast the next day just because I don't think he'd really care. He's kinda mad everyone got rid of Lindsay. Sierra and Ezekiel would probably end up being pals since they both got far in season 3 and at least have that in common. Ezekiel once again helps to obliterate the villains in episode 3, and they already did bad in canon, so he'd easily help take them down. He probably takes down Joe before she shows up in the cave, so the heroes win before Courtney uses Sam as a shield. Ezekiel chooses to go to Boney Island, as he doesn't really have many friends, and plus he's used to roughing it out with the animals due to his time on the plane and World Tour. As for the vote, it's still Joe, as nothing much changed. I don't think we'd have a team swap though, since Courtney didn't use Sam as a shield. Sure, she stayed behind while everyone else fought, but that's about it. Not worth swapping yet. And because there's no team swap, that means Gwen never kicks the leeches onto Courtney by accident, so she wouldn't cry in the confessional, which leads to Courtney hearing. Due to that fact, she still hates Gwen. Ezekiel returns from Boney Island, but he doesn't have the idol, although he did try to find it. Courtney and Scott don't start their little interactions, since they're not on the same team here. This also means Scott is less motivated to eat, as Courtney yelling is what made him do it. I'm gonna assume Courtney and Duncan swap spots for eating now, since they have opposite teams. But then I remembered Courtney would probably still keep the foot soldiers do the work while I hang back thing. So she chooses to go last, hoping the rest of the team will finish the pancakes before she even has to go. This means Ezekiel takes the spot of Duncan instead, as I imagine he's able to eat quite a bit, making things a bit closer. It also means Gwen barfs on Ezekiel instead of Duncan, who goes next. Since not everyone on the villains team has gone this time, Chris doesn't allow Sam and Zoe to swap, as he only allowed it if Heather and Al did too. but Heather needs to finish her portion, so her and Zoe continue. Neither would do as good as the original person did, meaning we can continue with Sam versus Alejandro. Sam is able to bring it back for the heroes, since the villains were a bit further behind without Courtney, and due to Scott's motivation being lowered. However, Sam still took some pancakes for later, so he gets voted off. Scott goes to Boney Island, and Chris now chooses to swap Duncan and Courtney, as Courtney hasn't been very heroic. She chose to let her team do all the work twice now, which is pretty villainous. Duncan gets the same welcome as he did in canon, but Zeke doesn't really care for him. Courtney also doesn't care much for Scott, but their cute little interactions would begin in this episode after Scott comes back from Boney Island. Courtney isn't gonna laugh at Gwen's jokes since she isn't sympathetic to her, as she never heard her crying. She still hates Gwen almost entirely. Duncan isn't insecure about Courtney and Scott since they haven't interacted until now, which he wouldn't know about. Ezekiel is able to help the heroes catch up a lot faster, but Mal swapping to Mike leads to them losing. Scott goes to Boney Island again, but Gwen doesn't break up with Duncan since he's less insecure about Courtney. Because Cameron volunteered for elimination and we have an extra person, Chris would probably just let it happen. We really don't need more members on the cast, and this is the one episode where nobody gets booted originally. Well, besides the next one where Cameron also gets saved from elimination. Yeah, he does that a lot. So now Cameron gets a really lame elimination, but I think that would kind of be the point. He's like, oh, I volunteer, and then Chris is like, okay. And then he's just, okay, bye. Since there's no new guy on the team, Cord is obviously going to be trying to boot Gwen instead. Since Zoe said if she offered Duncan the apple a few days ago he wouldn't have accepted it, I don't think he would here, as he's been with the heroes for less time and is still dating Gwen, so he's less open to friendships. He's also a lot less worried about his image this time, which allows him to focus more on the challenge. He would probably just steal the egg from the bird instead of crying about it, but maybe he'd still be remorseful, but not to the same extent. In addition to that, they also have Ezekiel on their team, so the hamsters are able to win easily once more. Alejandro steals Heather's invincibility statue and uses it to save himself, which means his vote for Heather is the final one, and that gets rid of her. Gwen and Courtney also don't ally since Gwen is still dating Duncan and Courtney doesn't care about Gwen as much. Duncan and Gwen interact briefly, with Gwen starting to dislike him a lot more now. Courtney helps Scott up after his loss to Fang, which takes Duncan off. Sierra would be less crazy now that Cameron's been gone a while, but she does still freak out about Cody. Cameron isn't there, so he doesn't point out the rigging of the game, which means Mike has to face his own fears. Chris couldn't find a clone of Mike though, so he settled for the mutant gophers from last season. Mal is shown to be strong, but I don't know if he could take 4 gophers at once. Gonna have to give him the L here. This puts the score at 1-1, and Duncan refuses to hit the baby bird, so he doesn't win either. Gwen ends up fighting Courtney, but Courtney still hates Gwen, so they're not playing nice at first. But I do think that they'd finally make up after punching it out, and Gwen dumps Duncan right there due to him still focusing on Courtney. And so the villains get 2 points from Chris, giving them the win. They also get to choose who gets voted out from the other team. Without Cameron there, I don't think Sierra would be a big pick for the elimination. Gwen and Courtney both want Duncan, Scott would want Zoe, and Al would probably want Ezekiel gone. So I think Duncan probably gets the boot here since he's just the majority, which is lame, but it's only an episode early, who cares. The teams merge, and this gives us the regatta challenge. Mal messes up all the boats, but Ezekiel catches up to him, jumping on the big boat with him. Mal tries to get him to leave, but he won't, so they start fighting. This fight gives Gwen and Courtney the lead, and Sierra and Zoe are left with the raft, and Scott jumps on. As they're rowing, they find Ezekiel in the water, and Zoe helps him up onto the raft. He tells her that Mike shoved him off his boat, which freaks Zoe and Sierra out. But Scott just says, if I saw you on my boat, I'd do the same. Ezekiel gets angry, so he shoves Scott off the raft, which attracts Fang. Sierra weaves a little lever to hold up Scott, which lets Fang push the raft. Chef drops dynamite onto them, but Ezekiel catches it and throws it away. I do think Sierra would be able to suggest Zoe get into some danger to see if Mike is really Mike, since she watched Revenge of the Island. This causes Mike to snap back to reality, only for Mal to return. Ezekiel sees that Mike isn't a good guy, and he's taking way too long to help Zoe, so he springs into action, jumping off the raft and splashing into the piranhas. This makes them spread out, and so the two swim away until Mal shows up, but he's too late, as now Ezekiel has saved Zoe, which she thanks him for. Mal lets them on his boat to compensate and apologizes to Ezekiel for how things went down earlier, but it's obviously disingenuous. He's trying to keep up his Mike appearance for Zoe. As for the winner of the challenge, it's Alejandro still, and he chooses not to bring anybody to the spa hotel. Looking at the votes, Mal rigged them against Cameron originally, and if it wasn't for Duncan blowing up his cottage, Chris was gonna honor that. And we didn't save Cameron the first time, so we aren't gonna save whoever takes his place here. And who does Mal have the biggest beef with right now? Ezekiel. I know, he's in the title, but he doesn't make it near the end. It sucks, but this is what I feel would realistically happen with the season All-Stars gave to us. Mike, Al, Scott, and Courtney all have decent reason to want Zeke gone, and Chris has ignored vote rigs before, even when multiple people stepped up to say their votes weren't for that person. But here, like I said, everybody has a decent reason to want Ezekiel gone. And in the original episode, Cameron says that the votes can't be unanimous because he didn't vote for himself, but Chris didn't care. Like I said, he only got saved because of Duncan, but Duncan's not here now. So, Ezekiel gets sent off, with him warning Zoe and Sierra about Mike before leaving. But just because Ezekiel's gone doesn't mean the what if is over. We've still got Sierra instead of Cameron, which changes things going forward. So let's keep going. That night, Mal moves the evidence under Al's pillow, but Al swaps it, causing Sierra to think Mike rigged the vote against Ezekiel. Zoe says it doesn't make any sense, but Sierra is very suspicious now. Zeke was a really good judge of character with Alejandro last season, so Sierra is trusting of him. But now, since Ezekiel isn't kidnapping Chris, we get the original episode, which was something to do with rhinoceroses, fire, poison, smallpox, gluten, and formaldehyde, as Chris stated. Now, in terms of what that would look like and how that ties into previous seasons, I've got no clue. So I'm just going to say this episode follows similar plot beats to the original, but obviously with the impacts of the what if. Gwen and Sierra pair up since Sierra can't really trust Mike and she needs an ally. Alejandro gets held back somehow, which replaces his boot getting stuck. Mal suggests to Zoe that they team up with Scott, but obviously that's insane to her that Mike would even want to do that ever. In response, Mal stutters, saying that it was just a possible option. Courtney and Scott bump into Zoe and Mal, but Cameron can't kiss Courtney, and I don't think Mal's gonna suggest Zoe kiss her. So at some point, Zoe gets trapped in some way, and Mal decides to leave her behind like he did to Cam originally. Alejandro arrives, offering to save Zoe, but she refuses, saying she doesn't need his help. She brings out some of her commando skills, remembering her friend Brick from last season. After making it out of that situation, she meets up with Gwen and Sierra, and the three work together, with Zoe asking if they've seen Mike. They have not. Eventually, Gwen ends up winning the challenge like she did in canon. She sends Alejandro to Boney Island, and Sierra gets some sort of injury due to the poison or rhinos or whatever else. She got hurt in some way, which mirrors Cameron's original boot. So goodbye Sierra, and now she's voted off. This means the rest of the season plays out the exact same way until the finale, at least kind of. Cameron didn't get injured now, but he's a lot less brave since he didn't make it far on either season he's on. So Cam and Gwen end up doing just about as much as they did for Zoe originally. Oh yeah, that also means Zoe can win 2 seasons back to back, win and get second, or get second and then win. Or she can get second twice. But yeah, that's Ezekiel if he was an All-Stars following the events of the last 3 videos. I know it wasn't super eventful, but I really tried to write interesting stuff while still following what I think would actually happen. My original plan was for Lindsay to make it past episode 1 and her and Ezekiel work together as a duo, but I just don't think anybody else would get booted first. Lindsay failed the team that episode, even with Ezekiel's help. And then I noticed the similarities between this season and World Tour's last few episodes, so I made Zeke try and save Zoe from Mal in place of Lindsay and Al. The duo with Sierra would just be a natural extension from World Tour, but I don't think they'd be a super substantial pair, which is why they didn't really do much here. But yeah, that's the what if. Big thank you to Derpy Murloc, who's our only member so far, and I hope you guys will hopefully check out the member system and see the awesome perks you get and want to support the channel. But as always, tell me if you liked this video, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.